2024 marks a significant year in the world history and geopolitics. The Israel-Hamas war triggered a fallout across the West Asian region. Yemen's Houthi rebels have been attacking merchant vessels in the Red Sea. Iran has been carrying out attacks against Israeli targets in the Middle Eastern countries. Iran also carried out aerial attacks in Pakistan's Balochistan, claiming it targeted separatist elements. Pakistan had launched retaliatory strikes in Iran's Balochistan, saying it also targeted separatist elements hiding across the border. Amid this backdrop, the United States, which is mediating with the Middle Eastern leaders for a peaceful resolution, is also headed for elections. The big question is, will Donald Trump return to power? To discuss that and more, we are now joined by former National Security Advisor of the United States, John Bolton. Let me begin by asking you, Ambassador Bolton, the Israel-Hamas war has been going on for more than 100 days now. How do you see the U.S. offensive? Has the Biden administration's efforts been enough to stop the conflict?
Well, I think the Biden administration is pursuing a policy that's increasingly at odds with what Israel has said its objectives are. And I think that means trouble ahead, because I think the Israeli government, and it's not just Bibi Netanyahu, it's the entire war cabinet, are committed to what they said their objectives were at the beginning, which is the elimination of Hamas's political and military capabilities. I think they're a long way from that for a lot of reasons. The tunnel network under the Gaza Strip is just incredible as we learn more about it. So I think this is going to be a potentially very difficult period for U.S.-Israel relations, because I don't see any sign on the Israeli side that they're going to relent and subject themselves to the threat of terrorist attack in the future.
What do you think U.S.'s objectives are at this stage? Initially, when the war began, Israel was a key ally. As this war continues, what are some of the stated objectives?
Well, I think what's not clear is the Biden administration's misapprehension about what this war actually is. It's not simply a Hamas versus Israel war. It's not a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's not an Arab-Israeli war. It's an Iranian war against Israel under the Ring of Fire strategy that they have put together over many years. Using terrorist groups like Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria, to put pressure on Israel, to weaken it, to put pressure on the Gulf Arab states, and ultimately on the United States. And unless you appreciate this bigger strategic picture, it's no wonder that the Biden administration policy is failing, because it's not addressing the real situation that exists in the region.
Are we possibly looking at a U.S.-Iran war now?
Well, I think there's possible conflict here. In fact, the conflict has already started. To be clear, since the Hamas attack on October the 7th, beginning a few weeks later, early November, by our count, there have been 150 or more attacks on American military and civilian personnel in Iraq and Syria, 150 or more, to which we have responded only with 6 or 7 pinprick strikes on Shia militia positions in those two countries. And in the Red Sea, the Houthis have been attacking civilian merchant vessels and U.S. naval vessels using Iranian-supplied drones and missiles. So our personnel are already in danger. We've suffered injuries in Syria and Iraq, and our military people have said off the record that the only reason we haven't had a major casualty incident is luck, and luck is not a strategy. So when we talk about war, the Iranians have already started the war. The question is whether we can establish deterrence in the region to prevent the conflict from growing even more. So far, we have not deterred the Houthi rebels, despite several strikes with the United Kingdom against Houthi positions. They're still firing at ships in the Red Sea. And we haven't deterred the Shia militia groups in Iraq. And one reason for that is the mullahs in Tehran see all these proxies as expendable. So I think until Iran begins to feel pain, this conflict, this broad conflict, this ring of fire strategy in the region will continue.
So you think the US must put more economic pressure on Iran and maybe military pressure as well?
Well, both. I think the Biden administration has done a terrible job of enforcing American sanctions against Iran. We know that over the past years, Iranian oil exports to China are back at the levels they were before the Trump administration withdrew from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. So I think tightening enforcement of the sanctions is an absolute minimum here. But I think until Iran feels pain, and there are several different things we could do. And I think that means military strikes against Iranian positions. Otherwise, they have killed over 1,200 Israeli civilians. We don't know what Israeli military casualties are. They've threatened Americans and other civilians in the region. This is unacceptable behavior.
What do you think is China's role in this entire region when it comes to arming Iran, arming the Houthi rebels, who will be hitting several merchant vessels going through the Red Sea? How do you see China's role in all of this?
Well, I think it's perhaps behind the scenes, but very significant. As I said, it's a key purchaser of Iranian oil. And I think what's at play here is the manifestation of the Moscow-Beijing axis that's being formed. I think you see Russia shifting from what had been a relatively pro-Israeli position over the years toward much closer involvement with Iran, much more hostile to Israel's efforts to defend itself. And I think Iran is a satellite, in effect, at least in part, of the China-Russia axis. So there's a lot in play here. We see the manifestations of this axis elsewhere, and North Korea and in Ukraine, obviously. But I think China and Russia, through Iran, indirectly, are trying to dismantle peace and security in the Middle East, not just for Israel, but for the Gulf Arabs as well.
Do you feel that China could have had a significant hand in signing, in encouraging the Israel-Hamas war and also the attacks that took place on Israel on the 7th of October?
Well, I don't know of any evidence of that, but I'd be surprised if in the close diplomatic relations that exist now between Iran and China, that there weren't conversations about it, and that perhaps China was given some advance notice, perhaps Russia was as well. We don't know. There's a lot we don't know, frankly. We don't know what Iran's objectives are in the current conflict. I think we know what Iran's ultimate strategic objectives are. They want hegemony over the Middle East, and they want hegemony within the Islamic faith. Now, what they think they're doing in this particular manifestation, I don't know, but I would be surprised if they weren't keeping China and Russia in the picture.
Right. Also, do you feel that this means US should be investing more in its relationship with India at this juncture, considering the threats that India faces from Pakistan and from China?
Well, look, I think the strategic tectonic plates are shifting worldwide. I really think we've moved into a new era of international relations. I think the post-Cold War era is over. And I think this new China-Russia alliance, very different from the Cold War in the sense China is the dominant partner and Russia's the junior partner. But I think the threat that China poses along the Indo-Pacific periphery, we've seen it manifested with respect to Taiwan and the South China Sea, border clashes along the line of control with India. I think these are all indications China's attempting to assert itself in its region and through proxies like Iran, even beyond. So I think the Asian Security Quad that was formed really at the suggestion of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, involving India, Australia, and the United States, I think it's a very good idea. I think we need to do a lot more work on it.
All right. Donald Trump, if he were to be re-elected, what kind of a role do you expect him to play in the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, I think it's very uncertain. Trump doesn't really have a philosophy of international affairs or of domestic affairs either. While we're on the subject, he doesn't think in policy terms. It would be a mistake in a second Trump term where he can't get a third term and therefore never will face the voters again. It's a mistake to think he'll behave exactly as he did in his first term. I don't think he likes Bibi Netanyahu personally. And if Netanyahu is still in the government when Trump arrives, really, there's no telling what Trump will do. He will look at the situation and view what his policy ought to be through the prism of whether it will benefit Donald Trump politically. And at this juncture, a year away from when that might happen, it's impossible to predict. But it won't be based on a strategic calculus of American national interest. It'll be based on a calculus of what helps Trump.
Right. Now, as somebody who has worked with him in the past, what are his chances of actually coming back, Ambassador Bolton? And what about people like you who once worked with him returning to the cabinet?
Well, I think it's entirely possible he can win the election in November. You know, there's a large group of people who don't like either Trump or Biden. I mean, polls show that 70% of the American people do not want a Trump versus Biden rematch, yet that looks like we're going to get. So how this large group of unhappy voters will turn out in November, hard to say. I have to say, if Trump wins, I don't expect he's going to offer me a position in a new administration. And if he did, I wouldn't take it anyway.
Right. So you're saying you won't take up the job in case he wins a second term. But how would he be for America? Do you think it would be a setback for America's role in geopolitics?
No, I think it will bring instability. I think his instincts are far more isolationist. He has threatened to get out of NATO, for example. I'm very worried about that. I'm very worried about our commitments with other allies and potential allies around the world. I think it'll be a very difficult 4 years. That doesn't tilt me toward Biden, who I think has been a very weak president, and under whom another 4 years would be even weaker. So it's a bad circumstance for America that it looks like a choice between two people, neither of whom really is fit to be president.
All right, we are running out of time, but Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for joining us on Global Eye. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of the program. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18 for more news and updates.